Hey, welcome back to Mrs. B Reads. This is part of the Summer Reading Pics edition. I am reading and reviewing all of the Rhode Island Middle School Book Award nominees for 2024. Yes, it's 2023, but we nominate them now, and then it becomes, the book of the year, right, for next year. So, I'm working my way through all 20 titles. Today I have 2 nonfiction texts and 2 fiction texts to talk to you about. Let's start with the nonfiction. All right, if you are a social studies teacher, if you love learning about Black history or ancient Egypt, ancient Africa, you got to get this book. So the author of this book, Tracey Baptiste, realized when her own children were coming home from school celebrating Black History Month, she realized that Black history in schools was being taught as the American Black history. So they're learning about, Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and maybe Harriet Tubman, right? But there's a history of oppression and a history of enslavement that's linked to that particular aspect of Black history. And if you were to look at all of Black history, the American history part of Black history is about that much. So the African kingdoms and civilizations and dynasties have been flourishing for 5,000–6,000 years. That is Black history. That's the bell. So African Icons. It's a great book. It's 10 people who shaped history. And a friend of mine is a social studies teacher, and she said, oh, is it all about ancient Egypt? No, it's not all about ancient Egypt. Because again, sometimes when we think about Black history originating out of Africa, we focus just on the Nile region, right? But, the Nile River Valley civilizations. But no, this goes beyond it. And one of the things that I loved, this is why studying this is so critically important, okay? When you look on a world map and you look at the continents and you look at the countries, they are not to scale. And I did not know this. If you were to look at the true size of Africa, you could fit all of the other countries and continents here into it. But if you were to look on a world map, on a globe, it would not appear that large. But it truly is that large. And so that is sort of metaphorical for the size of Black history, right? And how we only know a tiny little bit of it. This book is worth reading. It is wordy, but what I loved about it was that each story stands alone. And then in between are just little bits and pieces, like nature as character. As Africans became careful observers of the natural world, they learned how to read the land, becoming adept at coaxing crops from the soil, harnessing the trees and shrubs to their advantage, and identifying where in the landscape they would find minerals like copper, iron, and gold. She talks about Aesop. You guys, Aesop. You know, like Aesop's fables? I had never read any bibliographical information about Aesop. I thought that was pretty cool. Hannibal, where Hannibal Lecter gets his name from. Yeah. Really, just the amount of research that Tracey Baptiste did here is amazing. She talked about leaders that I had never even heard of before. And women are profiled in here just as much as men. This is a great book. It's a great book, and I'm adding it to my classroom library. Thanks, Tracey Baptiste. Nice job. Okay, nonfiction. This other nonfiction I thought was so interesting. Both nonfiction offerings in the nominee list this year are unlike any nonfiction I had ever read before. Certainly African Icons is of that ilk, and so is Alias, Anna. This is a true story of outwitting the Nazis. It is a story of a young girl. When the Germans invade Ukraine, so we're hearing a lot about Ukraine and the struggle for democracy that the Ukrainians are undergoing right now, okay? This is sort of the Ukraine backstory. So if that interests you, you will love this book. When the Germans invade Ukraine, Zana, a young Jewish girl, must leave behind her friends, her freedom, and her promising musical future at a world-renowned conservatory. She loves music. With no time to say goodbye, Zana, her sister Frina, and their entire family are removed from their home by the Nazis and forced on a long, cold death march. Her father bribes a Nazi guard, and they escape with nothing. And she actually has some sheet music. Just she and her sister escape. The parents go on. And her father, his last words to her were, I don't care what you do, just live. Right? So this same author as Lifeboat 12, I don't know if you read that, it's a great book. Here's the map of where her journey takes her. And the book starts in, there's musical, isn't that a lovely sound? There are musical metaphors all throughout. So part one is called the overture, just like an overture is the beginning of a symphony, right? The beginning of this book is called the overture. And it starts off in letters. She's writing to her grandmother. This is a girl in modern times writing to her grandmother, who is Zana, because she's got to do a history project. So we start seeing this in letters, and then we start seeing free verse. And then we start seeing all different kinds of poems. So, teachers, for April, National Poetry Month, I really recommend this book. History teachers, social studies teachers, are you studying oppressive societies? Are you studying World War II, the European theater? Get this book. I'm trying to find another example of, there's free verse, there's poetry. I should have really put sticky notes in here as I was reading along. It would have been filled with them. As we get towards the back of the book, it changes again, and we see, look, oh my gosh, here we go. All of this section of the author's notes. Look at that. So the author did a copious amount of research here. There are pictures. It's a true story. True story. That means anything to you. Zana at the piano at age 5. Zana and Frina, 8 and 6, when they moved to Kharkov to study music. Their father, their mother. 12 and 14, that was right before the Nazis marched them to the concentration camp. It's an incredible, incredible, incredible piece. And then the author gives us all this music information. So even music teachers, you got to get this book and put it in your classroom library. It's incredible how Susan Hood and Greg Dawson have hit so many content areas. It's bibliographic, it's historical, it's poetic, it covers topics of music and history. It's just incredible. It's a true story. I love this. A powerful and profound story of the Holocaust told with heart and soul and music. It's a new take. I've read a million zillion World War II books. And I know my 6th graders love to learn about that time period in history. And typically they're told in historical fiction style, right? In prose. But this is free verse and it's good. Get it. Alias, Anna. All right, the next two pieces. I want to talk about this one first. Maizy Chen, she is raised in California by a single mom. It is, by the way, Happy Pacific Islander and Asian Heritage Month. Maizy Chen is Asian. She's raised by a single mom on the West Coast. They go back to the Midwest to help their grandparents, mom's parents, who own a Chinese restaurant. Now, a Chinese restaurant in the Midwest, kind of an unusual oddity, particularly when you learn the history behind it. So Maizy's grandfather has dementia. She spends some time with him. No, I'm sorry. That's another book I read. He does not have dementia. He is ill, not dementia. She spends some time with him, and he starts to tell her the tale of Lucky. And as we come to find out, as this tale is woven throughout the story, Lucky is her ancestor. And we learn about the paper sons. So it goes all the way back to the Chinese immigration in the 1800s, to the anti-Chinese sentiment in this country at the time. In fact, there were laws passed not allowing any more immigrants from China. I know. So what happened is her ancestor, Lucky, was here already. He came to build the Transcontinental Railroad, which was built largely on the backs of Asian immigrants. So he's working on the railroad and completes it, works his way across the country, settles in San Francisco. Right as soon as that happens, they pass all of this anti-immigration business with the laws. And immigrants keep coming. And there's the huge fire in San Francisco. And many documents got burned. And so a sort of underground society of Chinese immigrants looking for a better future for their families and better homes for their families called themselves Paper Sons. And I never knew anything about it. I was never taught anything about it in history in school. And I think it is vitally important. I'm so grateful that Lisa Yee wrote this book, because this is vitally important information that we need to know about the founding of this country, the building of this country, immigrants in this country, and, loosely based on history, right? But the story here loosely based on how those immigrants helped one another, just as Maizy and her mom helped their grandparents. Now, on top of all of this, layered into all of this, is a mystery. A mystery with racist outcomes, and Maizy solves it. And I love that because it shows how empowered middle schoolers can be when they put their minds to it. This is a good book. It was really good. I really enjoyed reading it. Of the 4 here, I saved the best for last. So I don't know if you know this about me, but I love witches. In the fall, I mostly only read books about witches because it's the spooky season, right? And so recently, typically I'm in New England, and typically when we think about witches, we think about the Salem witch trials. Okay, and Witch of Blackbird Pond, of course, and I can't think of the name of the book by Anne Rinaldi, but there's another great famous book about witches of that time. Did you know that while the witches here were being persecuted and tried unjustly, the same thing was happening over in Scotland? It was. This book takes place in Scotland, and the main character is autistic, as is her older sister. They embrace their autism. They love it because it makes them who they are, but they also show us how hard it can be to live as not being neurotypical, as neurodivergent, how tricky it can be. The author's description of feeling the need to stim, or how hard it is to mask, literally made me cry. And as a teacher, it made me understand my students who are on the spectrum even better. This is a great, great read, just from the autistic perspective of it, right? Now, layer on top of it the witch thing. Oh yeah, you got me, honey. I walk through the juniper woods and pretend that I have magical powers. I cast spells on the trees and on the water. My large headphones are playing music while I spin and stim through the trees. I wonder if any of the witches walked this path. My sister is walking behind me, laughing. I pretend to cast a spell upon her, and she collapses into the muddy path. I scream in delight. The author herself, Elle McNicoll, is neurodivergent, so it's an own voices book. Own voices means that the author has experienced it, and so really writes with truth and integrity, and a deep understanding of the situation. This book is so good. The theme, speak, even if it's quiet, right? The theme of persecuting the unusual, the non-typical, the divergent, right? Ever since Miss Murphy told us about the witch trials that happened centuries ago right here in Juniper, Scotland, outside of Edinburgh, I can't stop thinking about them. Those people weren't magic. They were like me, different like me. I'm autistic. I see things that others do not. I hear sounds that they can ignore, and sometimes I feel things all at once. I think about the witches now with no one to speak for them. Not everyone in our small town understands. Not Jenna, who used to be my best friend, not Nina, my older sister, but if I keep trying, maybe someone will. I won't let the witches be forgotten, because there is more to their story, just like there is more to mine. This book really struck a chord with me. I went to Salem last year and walked the memorial walk where there are benches and placards and stones for each of the victims of the witch trials. And it occurred to me very, very sadly that they were persecuted for being outside the norm, right? They were marginalized. They weren't witches, of course. They weren't casting spells. They weren't making anybody sick. They were just different, and they were persecuted. And I wonder truly how far our society has come. And then you read about the same thing happened in Scotland, and you see that a young autistic girl champions the cause. Oh my God, this book is so good. I didn't stop reading it. I picked it up and didn't get up until I was done. I could not put it down. So I really, really, really loved A Kind of Spark by Elle McNicoll. Thanks, Elle McNicoll. All right, that's it for these 4. Stay tuned, you guys. I've got more coming. These books are